Ad Astra, Scipio and Hannibal is a Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Mihachi Kagano. The bulk of the story centers on the Second Punic War, a war that was fought by two of the strongest empires of that time period, Rome and Carthage. It was the second of three wars fought between these two powers, to determine who would control several key locations in the Mediterranean. Before we dive headfirst into the story itself, however, I wanted to provide a brief summarization of the First Punic War, as it will contextualize some of the conflicts that we're going to talk about in the future. Now, the war began in 264 BC, with the Romans gaining a foothold on Sicily and Messina. Rome's superior discipline and sheer determination allowed them to secure many victories. However, these were primarily land victories. Fighting on the water, however, was quite another story for the Roman army. Now, as it turns out, the Roman navy was quite pitiful at this point in history. During the First War, it's estimated that 100,000 Romans died at sea. Some of it was due to naval battles, but a lot of it was due to shipwrecks. One storm in particular ravaged the entire Roman fleet so badly that it resulted in 150 ships being sunk. Now, many countries at this time period would just be utterly devastated by this. Their economy would collapse, their military would be done for, it would just be all over. But not for Rome. Their response? Build more frickin' ships. In fact, they had to rebuild their fleet several times over due to numerous shipwrecks. It's even estimated that they had to rebuild their entire fleet 5 times over. Now, the back and forth went on for years between Rome and Carthage, and eventually Rome gained a substantial advantage. Now, Carthage was at its financial limits, so Hamilcar Barca resorted to guerrilla tactics to keep the Carthaginian chances alive. In 242 BC, Rome created a new 200-ship fleet to sail to Sicily. By this point in the war, there was no enemy fleet to contend with. Admiral Hannibal of Carthage would contend with Rome 1 year later, and he would come in with a fleet of 250 ships. Unfortunately for him, these ships were undermanned, and if it weren't for favorable winds, the entire Carthaginian fleet would have been destroyed. Hamilcar, who was given insufficient supplies and men during the entire conflict, was tasked with negotiating a peace treaty with the Romans. In the deal, Rome took Sicily, while Carthage was able to keep Corsica and Sardinia. Now, during the First Punic War, Carthage utilized foreign mercenaries to bolster up their forces. After it was decided they had to pay back Rome an indemnity, there was no more money left to pay the mercenaries who fought for them. So from 241 to 238 BC, Carthage had its hands full with the mercenary war. Rome, not wanting this opportunity to go to waste, decided to help themselves to Corsica and Sardinia. And as you can imagine, this did not sit well with the Carthaginians, and it served as the impetus for what we're about to talk about in this manga story. And with that cliffhanger, let's get started with Ad Astra, Scipio, and Hannibal. Now, before we actually start the video itself, guys, I want to show you some merchandise. Now, everyone's looking for something to distinguish themselves in this age, and I'm betting a lot of you got some extra cash after Christmas. So why not try TT Aesthetic? They have a wide array of t-shirts and sweatshirts for your pleasure. I especially like the dank meme apparel. I mean, the selection there is just fantastic if you ask me. They also have anime-related merchandise like Berserk, Dragon Ball, One Piece, so there's pretty much something for everyone. And given the fact that you're on an anime channel, I'm sure you're probably going to find something that you like on there. And if you decide to buy something today and you use my code, you can get 15% off at purchase. So why not spoil yourself today and check out TT Aesthetic? And with that, guys, let's actually start the manga. The Romans experienced glory and triumph after mercilessly engaging in battles all over the Mediterranean. Glory would reign over Rome for the next 1,000 years. We were undoubtedly on the verge of witnessing a great empire. However, a monster named Hannibal Barca, the future commander of the Carthaginian troops, would become the worst nightmare of the Roman army. Our story begins on March 241 BC in northwest of Sicily. A man named Hamilcar Barca bemoans the foolishness of the leaders of Carthage. They are not taking this war seriously, and are using it as a political tool to undermine him. Hannibal, the eldest son of the Barca family, determines that Carthage is done for, as it's now deprived of its naval advantage. By the way, he's making this assessment as a 6-year-old. Shortly after Hannibal was born, Hamilcar decided to sacrifice him to Baal, their god, so that they may be blessed with a strong and brave male heir. But before they could kill him, Hannibal spoke the name of Baal, which made his parents think that he was chosen by Baal himself. Back in the now, Carthage accepted their defeat to the Roman army, as things only got worse from there. Carthage would have to pay Rome for their losses, and even apologize for their inconvenience.
Hannibal, who had never laughed in his life, stepped forward and proclaimed that Rome could take everything from them. Everything except for madness. Hannibal looks down upon the Romans and states that he will punish them for humiliating Carthage. The Romans send their soldiers upon the boy, but the Carthaginians rise up and vow to slaughter 100,000 Romans if Hannibal is hurt. On this day, Hannibal Barca was born, and he was to be the Roman army's worst nightmare. 1 year after this dispute, the heavens sent Rome a genius capable of competing with the monster known as Hannibal. It is now 219 BC in Hispania. Hannibal was aiming to take down Saguntum, and going after this was like declaring war on Rome. And with this, Hannibal's revenge was already in motion. 1 year later, we see Scipio of Rome playing dice to see who will pay for drinks. In the midst of the game, Scipio states that Carthage shouldn't have the manpower to compete with Rome. Yet, they are oddly confident, which means that they must have another plan in mind. The game resumes as Scipio has a woman steal the money purse from the man he's playing against, which means that he's won the game. Now, Scipio went against the common sense rules of the game itself, but he relates the situation to what Rome is going up against Carthage. Common sense would dictate that Rome should win, but as we just found out, common sense can be subverted. Scipio tells a story where Hannibal deliberately ran away from the enemy. The Romans used common sense to chase him down, thinking that they could rout him. But Hannibal lured them into a river where he could easily massacre them. By responding quote-unquote logically, the Roman army took their first step to their doom. Elsewhere, Mago Barca, Hannibal's youngest brother, starts having trepidations about fighting the might of Rome. But Hannibal reminds him that even though Rome knows their plan, they are still trembling with fear. Publius, Scipio's father, determines that Hannibal had to deal with Gaul. Having dealt with Saguntum, Hannibal's army marched towards Massilia, where the Roman army was heading to put a stop to their ambitions. Publius considers the notion that Hannibal was leading them here so that he could defeat them on the battlefield of his choosing. Scipio does not think that this is the case. He thinks that Hannibal is planning to cross the Alps. Scipio gets called out for making this assumption, since the Alps are way too exhaustive to cross. The Romans find out that Hannibal's army burned down the Gaul village, and as a consequence, Gauls lost everything. Afterwards, Hannibal followed the Rhone River to the north, which means that he's making his way to the Alps, just like Scipio hypothesized. The Boii revolt was done to slow down the Romans, which means they have now sided with Hannibal and are guiding him through the Alps. Hannibal's ultimate plan is to fight Rome, with a united army of the Gauls and the Carthaginians. With Hannibal's army 3 days ahead, they'll have to head back to Rome before he manages to get the Celts to join him. Publius admits that he's a bit jealous of his son and his acumen for strategy. According to the reports, Hannibal lost 20,000 soldiers in the Alps, and he only gained 10,000 Gauls. With the Carthaginian army at about 30 to 40,000 troops, they stand no chance against the Roman army. Confident in the might of Rome, Publius takes this opportunity to prepare an attack against Carthage. Days prior to this, Hannibal visited the Gaul village, and he had some of his men engage in a duel to the death. Now the once dejected and tired soldiers were hollering with vigor and excitement. Afterwards, Hannibal gives a rousing speech that makes the Gaul join his side to fight for their honor. To seal their allegiance, Hannibal promises to bring back the head of Publius. As the Romans confidently head out, Scipio asks Brennus what he's hiding from them. The Carthaginians then confront the Roman army on the battlefield, with Hannibal riding on an elephant. "So it's him, Hannibal," says Scipio. Now this is the makeup of the battlefield, with the Velites at the front, the Gallic cavalry in the middle, and the Roman cavalry at the rear. Hannibal changes his mount, serving as a spear point for the attack. The Lancers miss their target, as Hannibal's army plows right through. Hannibal reaches the Gauls that have yet to join him, and says that he is their only hope to see Rome go down. Scipio realizes this was all a means to create a divide between the Romans and the Gallic soldiers. In addition, by drawing the Roman army's attention to him, it opened up an opportunity for the Numidians to flank the Romans. The Romans find themselves trapped within Hannibal's brilliantly devised encirclement. Hannibal ruthlessly laid out his trap like a spiderweb, and now he's devouring his prey. Scipio's father then gets impaled by a spear, as the young boy rushes over to his side. Scipio escapes with his father, but Publius wants to stay with his troops to the bitter end. However, Scipio reminds him that if the Roman commander dies here, then the Gauls will certainly side with the Carthaginians. Even though the Romans were completely lost, Scipio still looks over at Hannibal with a smile on his face. And no one realized it at the time, but the true opponent of the Carthaginians was not the consul, but the young man riding by his side. Tiberius from Sicily comes to help even things out. Now with Publius injured, Tiberius will take command of the 40,000 soldiers. That being said, Scipio is confident that Hannibal will still not be defeated. Scipio gets chills just thinking about fighting Hannibal, as his father wonders if he's losing his mind. We now go to the opposite bank of the Trebia River, Hannibal's camp. A former Roman soldier is now serving the Carthaginians, and he overhears a rather interesting conversation. Hannibal senses that it's going to snow tonight, and he wants to use this opportunity to open up hostilities with the Romans. The former Roman soldier, who is still loyal to the motherland, wants to warn Scipio about this plan at once. The Numidians start their night raid, as Scipio looks forward to the upcoming show. Tiberius and the Romans chase them into the river, only for them to realize that the water is freezing and the tides are rising. Scipio acknowledges that this plan is primitive, but its efficiency is quite formidable. Hannibal congratulates Hannibal on luring out the Romans to the river. He then commands the Balearic slingers to show their prowess, as the Romans are forced to run away. Though their defeat is assured, they still have to fight on to prevent the Gauls from joining the enemy. Now with the rain turning into snow, everything is moving to Hannibal's plan, as he gets ready to move on the offensive. The Roman soldiers are going numb from the cold temperatures as Scipio says that this battle is now a lost cause. Tiberius does not take kindly to this, as he smacks Scipio with the backside of his fist. Tiberius rouses the troops, making them forget about the freezing cold temperatures. Each side takes up their battle positions, as Hannibal starts the affair with his rock slingers. The Carthaginians rush the enemy as the Romans are surprised by their numbers. Elephants stampede through the battlefield, but Tiberius keeps his men calm as they take down the large beast. Afterwards, the Romans make their way forward, as it seems like it's playing into Hannibal's hands. Scipio and Marcus ride away from the front lines, as it looks like the infantry of the Roman army is dominating Hannibal's army. Hannibal cuts off their escape, as it looks pretty dire. Though the Romans are fighting well, Hannibal commands his men to surround and annihilate them. Before Hannibal cuts down Scipio, he directs his men into a flanking attack. Gaius defects from the Carthaginian army to reconvene with Scipio. He tells Scipio that Mago has 2,000 of Hannibal's strongest men ready to ambush the Roman army from the rear. And with that, Hannibal's 2,000 elite soldiers make their move on the Roman army, as they now find themselves completely surrounded. Tiberius is at a complete loss for what to do next, so he implores his men to push forward and to break out with their own strength. Now the battle is moving according to Hannibal's plan. He's enveloped the enemy with terror, and quickly they're going to lose command of their soldiers. After Gaius tells him about the situation, Scipio is utterly shocked by how far ahead Hannibal is compared to them in strategy. Scipio then grabs onto a horn and says that he's got a plan. He and his men race across the battlefield, telling the Roman soldiers that they got reinforcements on the way. Off in the forest, we see Gaius blow the horn, and it's to give the appearance that reinforcements are on their way. Tiberius picks up on Scipio's plan and urges his men to charge forward with a newfound confidence. Hannibal tells Hannibal to pursue the Romans that broke out, as he's not buying into the enemy's ruse. Silenos is surprised that Scipio was assimilating Hannibal's strategy so easily. Hannibal then tells Silenos that he wants to know who that young Roman soldier is, and he's referring to Scipio. Upon returning to the motherland, the Senate wastes no time in criticizing the army's carelessness and handing the crafty Hannibal. Former consul and plebeian Flaminius takes this opportunity to throw shade at the patricians and to support the plebeians, most likely to gain votes for himself. And for those unfamiliar, the patricians were the wealthy nobles in Rome, whereas the plebeians were the commoners. Fabius, the leader of the Senate, realizes that he could use this to his advantage, and decides to feed into Flaminius' ego. With the backing of the Senate, Flaminius flaunts his newfound power, as the common folk see him as some sort of a hero. Fabius has set this whole plan in motion to get the citizens to realize how dangerous the Carthaginians are, and he's hoping that this will be a plan that guarantees that Rome cannot lose. Hannibal's army massacres Flaminius' men. They kill 15,000, take 4,000 as prisoner, with only a mere 6,000 managing to escape with their lives. The Romans then finally realized the threat that they're up against. They united as a people, and Fabius was appointed as dictator. All was not well for the Carthaginians, however, as Hannibal's eye has been infected with poison. Now some see this as an evil omen, but Hannibal says that for a large army such as theirs, they have to maintain their quality and their quantity. And for them to do this, they need to keep up three things: food, women, and victories. Back in Rome, Fabius reminds the Senate that they were unable to attain one victory against Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's father. So they redirected their effort to control the seas surrounding Sicily. And through that, they isolated him on the island and kept him from the battlefield. And it was there that he eventually surrendered while remaining undefeated. Fabius then says that they'll burn down their own fields before Hannibal and his army can snatch them up. Once Hannibal sends out small detachment forces to get some food, Rome will make their move, but only on the detachment forces. In effect, it will become a war of attrition. Hannibal sees the destruction of Rome's farmlands for himself, and determines that the current dictator, Fabius, is cut from a different cloth. While the Carthaginians loot a local village, they see the Roman army staring at them from afar. Hannibal acknowledges Fabius's long-term strategy, but reminds Silenus that it only works so long as he has the people's support on his side. With this in mind, Hannibal will drive a wedge between Fabius and the people. He will do this by laying waste to every single area that does not lie under his control. Tensions begin to rise in the Roman army, as Fabius does nothing to help the villagers that get brutalized by Hannibal's men. Scipio worries about the effectiveness of this plan, but Fabius has planted a mole to infiltrate Hannibal's ranks. Hannibal wants to make his way toward Casinum for the winter, as we can clearly see who's the mole in his army. With Hannibal going where he wants them, Fabius sends his men through the nearby mountains. Scipio is surprised to find out that there's some treachery afoot in the Roman army. Apparently Magister Minucius holds power in the shadows, and it seems Fabius has lost sway amongst the troops. Emilios, the former consul, has reservations about this underhandedness, but Minucius asks him honestly if he believes Fabius's plan is a long-term solution to this battle. Emilius's lack of enthusiasm speaks for itself, as Minucius will carry forward with his own plans in mind. Emilius speaks to Scipio afterwards, and says that Fabius is risking more than anyone else by sticking to this unpopular plan. Elsewhere, Hannibal questions Haru's specs on why they're heading in the wrong direction, and the old man claims that he simply misheard him. Not only is the town they're heading to hemmed in by the ocean and the mountains, but it's been surrounded by the Roman soldiers, which means that the old man is a Roman spy. And as expected, it doesn't go so well for the old man, as they tie him up and stone him. After killing the old man, they realize the direness of their circumstances. They're basically in a cage at this point. To make it through the winter, they resolve that they're going to have to eat their own oxen. But without a means for transporting their own supplies, things will only get tougher in the springtime. Minucius wants to slay Hannibal here and now, but Fabius says that it would be foolish to fight a cornered lion. Minucius reminds him that if they let this opportunity slip, Hannibal could squirm his way out of this prison that they put him in. Scipio agrees with Fabius's plan, stating that the Gauls could revolt against Hannibal, or they could simply just run out of food. Now Hannibal realizes that hunkering down for the winter will not help their disposition. So instead of killing the oxen, he proposes that they escape from their prison tonight. Hannibal plans on using the cow's shadows to terrify the Romans. The Romans catch wind of Hannibal's movement. As they prepare themselves for battle, Fabius suspects foul play, as he wonders why Hannibal would capture a single hill in the middle of the plains. Minucius wants to pounce, but Fabius still urges caution as Hannibal is especially dangerous. Just then, the Roman scouts are attacked by beasts that look like minotaurs. Now it's clear to us as the readers that these are oxen, but the Romans' imaginations get the best of them, as the oxen stampede through the camp. The diversion had the desired effect, but the true monster that Fabius is scared of is the commander of the Carthaginians, Hannibal. Hannibal never attacked the Romans. His whole strategy was built upon escaping. The Carthaginians made a clean escape, as Fabius's battle of attrition has backfired in the worst way possible. While Fabius sulks, Minucius confidently gloats that he'll be able to take Hannibal down. Upon returning to the Senate, Fabius hears that Minucius's army has already defeated Hannibal's army. Well, to be more precise, it was a force led by Gisco, one of Hannibal's officers. And with this, Minucius is raised to the position of second dictator. After the meeting, it suggested that Hannibal allowed this defeat to take place, and it was all a means to trap the Roman army. To be more precise, it's to divide Rome's leadership into two factions. Upon returning to the battlefield, Scipio learns that Gaius was instrumental in the last battle. Gaius's lucky spear throw was able to stop Gisco from killing Minucius. Minucius and Fabius then split the military in half, to see who will fare better against Hannibal. Gaius heads off with Minucius, as Fabius says that this will be the last time that they see them. Hannibal's army has stationed Balearic slingers on a hill for a defensive position. Minucius wants to use a testudo formation, a tortoise formation, and in this way, they're going to create a seamless shield that will be able to defend against the rock slingers. Gaius, who's not too cunning himself, realizes that this plan is probably going to get him killed. Hannibal wants to use the depressions of the hill and the unevenness to his advantage. Minucius's troops advance forward with their tortoise formation. Gisco then says that this falls perfectly in their trap. The Romans get completely battered as Hannibal's detachment force lies in wait for them. Hannibal's army makes their charge, as the Romans quickly find themselves surrounded. Now it turns out that Hannibal sees the battle play out in his mind before it actually happens. and he carefully weaves all sorts of traps just like a spider for his opponents to fall into. Minucius realizes he's been played this entire time, and that he grossly underestimated Hannibal's tactics. Minucius' hubris will not allow him to retreat, as he will fight this losing battle to the bitter end. Gisco charges in with his horse, ready to finish the job he couldn't do in the last battle. Emilios reminds Scipio that the cavalry are on horses so that they can make a quick escape from the battlefield, and this is only reserved for the patricians, not the plebeians. In his formative years, Emilius was friends with Minucius, and as it turns out, Minucius was a plebeian. One fateful day, Emilius escaped from the battlefield as he screamed, "Out of my way, you filthy plebs! Open a path!" And it just so happened that Minucius was there when he said it. And obviously, Minucius was not too pleased to hear this, as that was the end of their friendship. Emilios lost a friend that day, and he's got to carry that guilt until the day he dies. With Minucius in trouble, Scipio says that they'll go save him along with Gaius. That being said, Fabius says that Minucius will have to fend for himself. Meanwhile, Minucius nearly dodges Gisco's attack. Emilios makes an appeal to Fabius, but the co-dictator will not be swayed by emotions. Scipio says that Rome is the superpower it is today thanks to learning from its countless mistakes, and Fabius must allow Minucius to learn from his. Fabius threatens Scipio before heading inside of his tent. Gisco pierces Minucius' arm with his spear, as he easily blocks Gaius' javelin. Now Minucius shows good vigor by fighting back, but Gisco is clearly more talented than him. Elsewhere, having a change of heart, Fabius commands his Roman legions to charge onto the battlefield to help out Minucius. Hannibal wonders what's the meaning of all this, as the Romans have seized the advantage. Hannibal gives the order to retreat all the troops, realizing that there's nothing to be gained by this continued fighting. Pyrrhus, a man who Hannibal considers a strategic mastermind, second only to Alexander the Great, had a battle 50 years ago where he crushed the Romans, but he sustained so many losses that he ended up losing the war because of it. Scipio determines that Hannibal's relationship with the Gauls is much shakier than he once thought, and this could prove to be the means to defeating Hannibal in the future. Minucius returns to Fabius, admitting to his blunder. He finds out that Emilius swayed Fabius' mind on the matter, and that's why he's still alive right now. And from now on, Minucius would become a loyal follower of Fabius. At home, Senator Varro paints out that only Fabius' properties have remained untouched by Hannibal. Varro suggests that there's possible collusion going on, and says it's only a matter of time before the Gauls attack. A man then accuses Scipio's father of colluding with Hannibal, but Scipio suspects foul play and accuses him of being in league with the enemy. He says that the enemy is trying to drive a wedge in Rome, as he helps out Aemilia. Now, Aemilia is a girl who was getting accused of being Hannibal's whore. Aemilia's father is running for consul. It turns out that her father is Emilius, and he's also getting accused of selling out Rome. Scipio says her father isn't uniting the people, which could be a detriment, and that earns him a slap in the face. Scipio then says that Hannibal's forces aren't receiving reinforcements, but with Rome fighting battles on multiple fronts, it has its hands full. Gaius then finds out that Aemilia is Scipio's fiancée. Later on, Varro says that the masses are stupid, and respond to simple ideas that reassure them of their own welfare. When/if he wins, he plans on combating Hannibal with a force that's twice his. And sure enough, the people responded to this, by voting Varro in as the next consul. Emilius feels surrounded on all sides by Hannibal, Varro, and the Roman citizens. Fabius urges Emilius to stop Varro at all cost, to prevent Rome from destroying itself. Scipio says that they need to recreate a Pyrrhic victory, in which Hannibal wins the battle, but the resultant losses prevents him from opposing Rome any longer. Fabius says that Hannibal wouldn't engage in such a battle, but if he did, he's fully capable of massacring 86,000 Roman soldiers. As it turns out, the Roman sheep are marching towards a lion who's commanding an army of lions. At Hannibal's camp, we find out that Varro's right-hand man is actually a spy for Hannibal. If Hannibal can defeat the Romans, the spy city of Capua will throw its support behind the Carthaginians. Hannibal then finds out Scipio's name, as he has a very serious look on his face. Emilius says his farewells to his daughter, as Varro belittles him by saying he's a buffoon. Fabius asks Jupiter for a miracle, but he realizes that Emilius is nothing more than a lamb compared to the Carthage lions. Hannibal made his way to the Roman supply depot of Cannae, and the Romans were hot on his heels. The Carthaginians marvel at Rome's level of engineering, but Hannibal commands Maharbal to greet the Romans with a small raiding party. Gaius receives premium Roman equipment thanks to Scipio.
Hannibal makes his opening attack, as the only two people predicting the horrifying fate that was about to befall Rome was Hannibal and Fabius. It was the summer of 216 BC. The clash that would immortalize Hannibal's name in the record books was about to take place. Hannibal would conduct small raiding parties while the Romans were retrieving water. Now the Carthaginians wonder why they're doing this without engaging the enemy directly, but it turns out that Hannibal has another plan in motion. Varro's patience is running thin, as he claims that Aemilius is a coward. Scipio informs everyone that Hannibal is always using the natural terrain to his advantage. He did this at the Battle of Trebia, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, and the Battle of Geronium. By using the river to his advantage, he could surround an opponent double his size. Varro returns and says that if Aemilius is not ready to fight for Rome's sake, then he should just leave. Aemilius pounds his fist on the table and says that he will not turn his back on this battle. Hannibal tells Mago to request more troops from the homeland, and to get the Gauls to show more patience in this upcoming battle. The reason he wants more patience is because it's going to involve a true envelopment tactic. The Romans opted for a frontal assault, as the battle was ready to commence. Though this plan could open themselves up to a pincer attack, it was much more favorable than getting surrounded on the river. Now the night prior, Aemilius is torn about how to handle the upcoming battle. He considers the possibility that Varro is right, and that inaction would lead to Rome's eventual ruin. Minucius offers his life to fighting Hannibal, which gives Aemilius a newfound sense of resolve. With the battle starting, a dust of wind kicks up, allowing Hannibal to form a bizarre formation akin to the curved crescent of the moon. The Balearic slingers fling their rocks as the Romans charge forward into battle.
The right-wing cavalry of Rome get decimated by Hannibal's army. The left wing is not faring any better, as Minucius is in a real bind. Though the Carthaginians are dominating on the flanks, the Romans are showing their resilience in the center. That being said, it's not long before the right cavalry are completely routed. Aemilius is attacked by a stray soldier in the knee, leaving him in a life-or-death situation. Aemilius commands Scipio to assist Varro on the left, as he'll take up command in the center. Aemilius hands Scipio his daughter's charm, as the young man heads off. Upon arriving on the left, Varro commands Scipio's men to serve as a distraction while he makes his escape. Though the Romans are smart to concentrate their efforts in the center, it is something that Hannibal predicted, and it falls perfectly within his plans. When Rome's infantry breaks through, Hannibal deploys his hidden infantry to ambush the enemy from the flanks. Hannibal's army quickly and decisively surrounds the Romans, and the results speak for themselves. Months prior to the battle, Mago was surprised to see so many scars on Hannibal's body. But Hannibal learned from his father that you must embrace bloodshed if you're to earn the respect of your troops. And you'll notice how this contrasts with the Roman leaders, particularly Varro, who was an absolute coward on the battlefield. Many of the Romans panic with the current encirclement, but Minucius remains confident that they'll break through. Hannibal's men unleash their inner beast, slaughtering the Romans like there's no tomorrow. Turns out Hannibal had hidden his army's strength this entire time. He used advantages with terrain to mask how brutal his troops could really be. Though sacrifices were made, Hannibal convinced the Gauls that they were to die with honor in defeating Rome. Gaius gets slashed across the face, as the Gauls show no mercy. Now Scipio wants to use the 10,000 reinforcements at the camp to break through the current encirclement. General Servilius of Rome, the vice commander, was taken down in the encirclement. And as a result, the men go into a panic, as Minucius attempts to calm everyone down. Gisco then emerges to settle the score with Minucius. Minucius slams his arm into Gisco's blade, causing blood to spray into his face. Gisco quickly turns the tables, as Minucius laments about the dire situation. Minucius apologizes to Aemilius for not doing better. Now before Gisco delivers the fatal blow, Aemilius steps in to save Minucius' life for his own. Appius, the centurion for the reinforcements, refuses to offer assistance to Scipio, and he's saying it's because he would be sending his soldiers to a death march. Scipio becomes irate, so Marcus knees him in the abdomen to knock some sense into him. Despite his grave wound, Aemilius calls out for Minucius. Minucius leaps into the air to deal the fatal strike to Gisco, but surprisingly, Gisco manages to save himself. Minucius begs for Aemilius' forgiveness as the Gauls impale him multiple times. Minucius and Aemilius fell in battle, and with no officers remaining, the Romans were slaughtered one by one. And at the end of the day, the Roman casualties numbered at 60,000, while Hannibal's army only suffered 6,000. Thus was the result of the Battle of Cannae. A lone man from Africa successfully forced the glory of Rome to now contemplate its demise. Hannibal allows the Roman prisoners to head home. Even Bandius, a man who killed many Gaul soldiers. Now Gisco will likely lose his arm due to infection. So he asks Hannibal to give Minucius and Aemilius fitting funerals for having fought so hard. Hannibal then entrusts Mago to return home and asks for reinforcements and more funds. Marharbal wants to capture Rome next, but Hannibal says that they are ill-prepared to do so. That's because they do not have the necessary engineers to capture a fortified city like Rome. Marharbal criticizes Hannibal, but eventually he relents and sets off to find more provisions. Mago commissions some scavengers to find some wealthy, high-ranking Roman rings. The 3 scavengers then come upon Gaius, who is miraculously still alive. Scipio then returns to Aemilia to deliver the bad news about her father. Fabius excoriates Varro for his shameful behavior. Rome's grief was palpable after the defeat, as Fabius took extra precautions to protect the city. Scipio is now slated to go to Sicily to serve under Marcus Marcellus. Now Marcellus was awarded the highest military honor by killing the Gallic king. Now if Marcellus were to defeat Hannibal, there would be nothing stopping him from ruling all of Rome. Scipio angrily laments that he couldn't save Gaius or Aemilius. Scipio will thusly ascend the ranks so that he can make a difference in future battles. Gaius then recovers in a village, and realizes how peaceful it is here compared to Rome. He wants to live among ordinary people, which means he'll abandon his old life of fighting countless wars. The old woman who saved Gaius goes to pick some mushrooms, but unfortunately, Marharbal cuts her down where she stands. And it's not long before Marharbal's men burn down the village and steal all the valuables. Marharbal slices Tessaro's neck, as Emira begins to shed tears. The Gauls capture Emira and begin to strip her down as Gaius fights back. Unfortunately, he hasn't completely recovered from his wounds, and he falls flat on his face. Upon waking up, he thinks that Emira is fine and that they should escape. But unfortunately, Emira had her head chopped off, a sight that is utterly horrifying for Gaius. Gaius screams out to the heavens that he will kill Marharbal for what he did. In western Sicily, Marcellus greets the losers from Cannae. Scipio steps forward and asks Marcellus for a recommendation, since he wants to run for office one day. Now for him to earn that recommendation, he must strike a blow against Marcellus's head. The battle begins with Marcellus thrashing him violently. Scipio asks Marcus for a favor, as the battle is set to resume. Scipio lunges in as Marcus attacks from the rear. Alas, Marcellus takes them both out with ease. Now it turns out that Scipio switched swords with Marcus, and Marcus's sword hit Marcellus in the head. And that was all that Scipio needed to do to win the battle. He just had to have his sword hit Marcellus's head. So he just kind of tricked him. That being said, Marcellus beats Scipio for acting like a Carthaginian, and he orders his men to whip the two. A report then comes in that Hannibal's forces have invaded Campania, and that Marcellus must head there at once. Scipio wants to defeat Hannibal and become consul one day, but Marcellus says that he'll be the one that defeats Hannibal. Now Rome refused to buy back the 10,000 Roman soldiers that were taken captive. So to overcome this challenge, they had to conscript men under the age of 17 and slaves to replace their manpower. Capua broke their alliance with Rome and opened the gates up to Hannibal's army. The citizens see Hannibal as a liberator, but a pro-Roman senator wants to eliminate him at once at the banquet tonight. A man then relates Capua to the tragedy that befell Milos 200 years ago. Now Milos had ties to Sparta, but Athens demanded its submission because they were the strong. And according to Thucydides, the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. Milos refused, thinking that their neutrality was going to save them. But it didn't. Athens killed all its men and enslaved its women. Now the father of the boy says that they must avoid the same fate as Milos by accepting Hannibal with open arms. The father then holds a banquet for Hannibal, and things are going well, until the son lashes out with a knife. Before the son does anything, the father stops him in the act. Hannibal sees how the father just tried to protect him, so he thusly believes in his loyalty. But he still has to punish the pro-Roman senator behind this plot. The senator calls the citizens foolish for believing in the Carthaginians, as the sun that had once shone on Capua hid amongst the thick, dark clouds. Hannibal's army then struggles capturing Neapolis and Nola, due to the lack of engineers. Hearing that Marcellus is in Nola, Hannibal wants to head there in that direction. Nola closes its gates on the Romans, as they wonder if Bandius and his men have switched allegiances. Bandius goes out to do battle with Marcellus. But in a surprising turn of events, Marcellus kneels down to honor the feats he accomplished in battle. Although Bandius had become an agent for Hannibal, Marcellus wants him to fight alongside him as a shield. Now Scipio completely misjudged Marcellus, as he now understands why he earned the highest military honor. Gaius then comes in and swears his fealty to Marcellus, and says that he will kill Maharbal even if it costs him his life. Marcellus batters Gaius in combat, saying that he'll never defeat Maharbal like that. Outside of Nola, Hannibal commands Maharbal to lay waste to the fields around Nola. Maharbal is becoming increasingly displeased with Hannibal, and he's even gathering followers to oppose him. Hannibal still hasn't received any news about more soldiers for now, so in the meantime, he's got to keep people around who disagree with him since he can't lose any men at the moment. In a flashback, Marcellus instructed Gaius to trade a fatal blow with another fatal blow if he hopes to ever defeat Maharbal. Scipio doesn't want him to sacrifice his own life so cheaply, as Marcellus then gives the order that they'll attack Hannibal tomorrow. Gaius is still injured, but he begs Scipio not to kill Maharbal, since he'll do it himself one day. Scipio attempts to stop Marcellus from fighting Hannibal, saying that no one can outwit him. Scipio thusly wants to adopt Hannibal's own strategy for their own ends. The gates are then opened up, as the Romans charge out with the ferocity of a wild animal. Hannibal responds by having his units charge the enemy's center. Marcellus shows the Gallic mutts just how ruthless he can be by lifting a soldier with one hand. Hannibal directs the javelins at Marcellus's horse, and they want to do this so that they knock him off. Bandius provides support as a shield as the two proceed to go on a killing rampage. Despite Marcellus's incredible strength, he's been completely enveloped by Hannibal's forces. However, Rome has a means for combating this thanks to Scipio. The Romans send out their reserve units, which means that Marcellus was serving as a diversion this whole time. And with this development, Hannibal breaks the encirclement and spreads open the flanks. Now the Romans are showing more grit than they did in the previous battles with the Gauls. Hannibal realizes that he's been bested, as he commands his army to retreat. While retreating himself, he realizes that Scipio has been present at each one of their major battles, and he slowly learned from his tactics. Marcellus and Scipio, a union of brawn and brains. It seems we now have quite a troublesome pair of foes on our hands. While only a minor victory, the realization that Hannibal was beatable was a source of hope for the Roman army. Elsewhere, King Philippos V of Macedonia wants to send an envoy to Hannibal. Mago shows off the treasures they accumulated in Rome to convince the quote-unquote 100 to throw their support behind Hannibal. Now the 100 was like basically a council or a senate that ran the Carthaginian Empire. Hannibal's older brother, Hasdrubal, is having a tough time in defending the Iberian Peninsula. So the 100 want to send reinforcements to him so that they can protect the silver mines. And as it turns out, Mago's also going to the Iberian Peninsula. And because of this, Maharbal blames Hannibal for dragging his feet with Rome. Magon, Hannibal's longtime friend, says that Hannibal could never understand the feelings of the commoners. Even at a young age, Mago, Maharbal, and Gisco all understood that Hannibal was a solitary figure, a man whose presence seemed too far to reach. Seems a lot like Griffith in a way. Magon accepted his mediocrity, but Maharbal wallows in his own delusions of superiority. In a sense, he's an alternate version of Magon, and he's pushing himself as hard as he can to see how far an ordinary person can go. An envoy from Macedonia shows up, giving Hannibal hope that the winds are still blowing in his favor. Hannibal then sends envoys to Macedonia. Gisco is unhappy about this assignment, but Hannibal wants him to take out Boster, a man who is inciting Maharbal's insubordination. While meeting with the Macedonians, the Roman fleet comes into their field of vision. Gisco decides to act as the bait for the Romans so that the Macedonians can escape unharmed. Now Gisco is unwilling to submit himself without putting up a fight first. Boster kicks Gisco from behind so that he can use this distraction to escape off of the boat. Unfortunately for him, Boster gets eaten by some sharks. Gisco then learns that he's going to be turned into a slave and sold to a far-off country. Upon hearing about this news, Maharbal blames Hannibal for being a coward. Hannibal then decides to turn over the reins to Maharbal in their next battle at Nola. Maharbal looks forward to killing Scipio in their next battle, but Magon warns him not to get too cocky. Maharbal reminds Magon that they got the highest quality of troops, so even an idiot could achieve victory. He states that if the Numidian cavalry were available in the last battle, they could have kept the enemy wings from reinforcing. Marcellus finds out that Maharbal will be commanding the Carthaginian army in the next battle, and that's happening because him and Hannibal are having a bit of a falling out. Scipio then finds out that Hannibal has his eye on him. Well, in a metaphorical way of speaking. He's watching his progress and seeing what he's doing. Scipio then warns Marcellus that his pikemen will be destroyed by the Numidian cavalry. But Marcellus takes exception to this and grabs the boy by the neck. Scipio believes the pikes will only serve to restrict their mobility, leaving them like sitting ducks. Scipio then wants to use a rope ladder from a ship to catch Hannibal, and this is all it means for Gaius to attain his revenge. It's 215 BC, springtime. The Second Battle of Nola is about to commence. In the midst of the fighting, Marcellus wonders how the slingers can fire their shots so far and precisely. He decides to advance with his heavy infantry to push the slingers back. Numidian cavalry break through and start tossing their javelins at the Romans. Hannibal is pleased with Hannibal's current success, but then he catches Scipio out of the corner of his eye. Scipio approaches Hannibal and says that he merely appropriated Hannibal's army. Hannibal charges forward as he seems like he's falling into Scipio's trap. After chasing him down into the forest, Hannibal's horse gets caught on a rope ladder. The same rope ladder that we saw earlier. A javelin goes into his horse's neck as Gaius steps forward with a serious look on his face. Hannibal strikes first, but Gaius continues charging closer and closer. Magone hears about Hannibal and decides to ride off to his rescue. Hannibal lands a deep cut on Gaius, but Gaius uses his closeness to slice off his right arm. And with this, Gaius lands the fatal blow, attaining the vengeance that he so sorely wanted. Magone is absolutely shocked by this, but those who can't withdraw when it's prudent can never conquer the world. With the Romans winning the battle thanks to Gaius, Marcellus appoints him the Centurion. Scipio then receives Marcellus's recommendation for aedile, thanks to his cunning tactics. It is now 212 BC, southwest of Syracuse in Sicily. Scipio is now an aedile, so he wears a special helmet into battle. Centurion Appius, who refused to help Scipio at Cannae, wants to join Marcellus's army. Scipio accepts the cowardice man and implores them to cleanse their disgrace by fighting Hannibal. Now, thanks to Fabius's war of attrition, Hannibal's army had trouble making progress. So they were now setting their sights on Syracuse, the greatest city in Sicily. Hannibal sent 2 of his brothers to subjugate Sicily. Marcellus was ordered to take back Sicily, but a strong foe stood in their way, the brilliant mathematician, Archimedes. Gaius and Bandius approach the city, but are met with much resistance. When they attempt to siege the outer wall, a gigantic claw drops down on their ship. They raise the claw up as it lifts the entire ship out of the water. Goddamn, just look at this manga panel right here. It's so detailed, it's so incredible. They then use reflective devices to burn a hole in the Roman ship's sails. Epictetus wants to meet with Archimedes in the palace, but the old mathematician is busy with his calculations. Word comes in that Macedonia has prepared an alliance with Syracuse. Now, no one has seen the messenger's face, so Scipio concocts a plan to fool the people of Syracuse. He disguises himself as the messenger to deliver the message to Hannibal's brothers. Afterwards, he goes to meet with Archimedes, but the old mathematician is gallivanting through the streets completely naked. Scipio learns that Archimedes will often do this to bring laughter and ease to the city's worries. Archimedes then shows Scipio a reflective mirror that can generate enough heat to light a flame. Epictetus then finds out that the man that they thought was from Macedonia was actually a Roman spy. Being a scholar, Archimedes has severe reservations about using his inventions for killing people. That being said, they are necessary, as the Romans might destroy Syracuse as they did to Henna. Archimedes says that the Romans have iron wills, and will do anything to defeat Hannibal. Soldiers surround the estate as Archimedes suspects that he's been talking to a Roman spy this entire time. Scipio admits to the accusation, and says that he was here to obtain information so that he could take down the city. Archimedes then offers him a game of chance to determine if he'll turn him in, or if he'll allow him to escape. Archimedes then hides a grape under one of 3 cups, and Scipio is to guess where the grape is. Scipio says the far right cup, as Archimedes reveals that the middle one had no grape. With 2 cups left, Archimedes then allows Scipio to change his choice if he so wishes. And Scipio takes him up on this offer, deciding to switch to the left cup instead. But as it turns out, the grape was under the right cup. Scipio then explains why he chose the left one based on probability, which definitely pleases Archimedes. Archimedes then tells Scipio about a weak point in the wall, but implores the Roman to put an end to the bloodshed at some point. Elsewhere, King Syphax of Western Numidia has changed his stance to oppose Carthage. With this drastic change, the Iberian front was about to experience a great upheaval. Now, in case you're wondering about the game of chance, it's actually smarter to switch your choice in such a situation. Take, for example, that there's 100 cups on the table and only one of them have a grape. Now, if you were to move the one cup that you choose to the side, your chances of being right would be 1%, which means that there's a 99% chance that the grape is in one of the other cups. Now, if you were to reveal 98 of the cups in which the grape was not in, and leave your original choice and the other choice, the probability still states that there's a 99% chance that it should be in the cup that you did not choose. In Scipio's scenario, he's taking a 67% chance that it's in one of the other cups. And even though he was wrong, he still gave himself the best probability. Anyway, back on track with the story. While the Carthaginians break into the estate, Archimedes says that the Roman spy left after having dinner with him. Hannibal's brothers force their way into the house, tearing everything apart to find the spy. Archimedes speculates that the spy might have jumped into the sea to escape the city walls. We then see that Scipio has blended in with the other Carthaginians, as he takes one last look at Archimedes before saying goodbye. Upon returning to Marcellus, Scipio wants assurances that Archimedes will not be harmed when they attack the city. Marcellus agrees to the request, and half a year later, Rome successfully takes the city for itself. Unfortunately, in the midst of the raiding, one of the Roman soldiers kills Archimedes, and it makes Scipio quite sad that he wasn't able to save the man that taught him so much. It is now 211 BC in Capua. Hannibal has 20,000 troops, which means that he's unable to defend Capua against the Romans. If you remember earlier in the manga, he had like 40,000 troops, so he's not getting any resources from Carthage. With this development, Hannibal decides it's finally time to visit Rome. Slingers start their barrage on Rome, as they put the fear of God into the citizens and the Senate. Fabius calmly says that Hannibal is attempting to bait them in, but Rome does not respond to such provocations, as they are completely safe within the city walls. After several days with the Balearic slingers, Hannibal admits defeat and decides to withdraw. When the Romans recapture Capua not too long afterwards, the citizens begin to rejoice. Hannibal then heads south to seize the port city of Rhegium, so that he can obtain more reinforcements from Carthage. Back in Iberia, the Romans suffered a devastating defeat in which Scipio's father and uncle were both killed. Scipio learns that Hasdrubal, Hannibal's younger brother, bribed mercenaries to betray his father and uncle. Now, it turns out that the eastern prince of Numidia also stormed the battlefield, leading to Scipio's dad's defeat. Nero then corners Hasdrubal in a ravine, but the terrain is rather rough, which means that the Romans would lose many men if they were to fight. Nero decides to give Hasdrubal until dawn to decide if he wants to surrender. The eastern Numidian prince thinks that Hasdrubal is a fool for what he's doing. That being said, he, as well as the Roman soldiers, are completely shocked that Hasdrubal built a tunnel for his troops to escape through. Nero was subsequently recalled back to Rome, where he was ostracized for his embarrassing behavior. Scipio then pulls him aside and makes a deal with him. He also claims that he'll capture Hannibal's main base, Carthago Nova. Nero explains himself to the Senate, and subsequently recommends Scipio for dealing with the threats in Iberia. Fabius is against this since the boy is still so young, but Scipio says it's time for Rome to go on the offensive and drive Hannibal away from Rome. After Scipio sways the crowd, Fabius allows this one-time exception, and he thusly makes Scipio the commander for the Roman army in Iberia. Scipio's army would port at Tarico, the main Roman base near Iberia. Now, these are the important bases within the Iberian Peninsula, and Scipio has taken his time to gather all the intelligence that he can. Now, the eastern Numidian prince will do whatever is necessary to kill Scipio like he killed his father. Scipio has his eyes on Hasdrubal, and he plans to use his 30,000 troops to end him. Gisco says that the Barcas are obsessed with Rome, but he'd much rather spend his time in Iberia where all the precious metals are. Now, Scipio deceived his men into thinking that they were going after Hasdrubal, since there were probably spies within their camp. Their real destination is Carthago Nova, Hannibal's main base. He claims they'll take the crucial port in one day, thereby becoming the Roman Hannibal. Despite only 1,000 troops in the city's high wall and natural defenses stop Scipio's army from making any progress. Scipio now wants Gaius and Marcus to serve as bait as he crosses over the walls. Now, the soldiers are hesitant to embrace his idea, but Scipio says that Neptune revealed this plan to him in his dreams. They're still reluctant to say the least, but Appius, the ex-centurion, volunteers to lead the assault. Scipio then appoints him the centurion once again, and says that the assault begins when the full moon rises. Hasdrubal decides to send cavalry ahead to harass Scipio while he's laying siege to Carthago Nova. As the full moon rises, the tide becomes shallow, opening up the perfect pathway to assault the port city. And once again, guys, I mean, Jesus, the artwork is just, it's on point. I mean, it just looks absolutely amazing. I know I said this at the beginning, but this is by far one of my favorite manga I've ever read in my life. It is right up there with Berserk. Of course, Berserk is still my favorite manga ever created, but this is pretty damn close. I mean, it's as close as you can get. It's Berserk, Blam, and Ad Astra for me, guys. This is my top 3 favorite manga of all time. Back on track, the Romans start clearing the wall as Appius leads the charge. Gaius then realizes that he can no longer reach Scipio's heights, as Carthago Nova falls to Scipio. Scipio gathers up the citizens and claims that they all have their own freedom now, which makes them pretty happy. The Celtiberian tribe that betrayed Scipio's father then meets up with Scipio. The leader then offers up his granddaughter, the most beautiful woman in all of Iberia. However, Scipio finds this display disgraceful and will not abuse his authority to seize women. And with this, Scipio will not allow anything to distract him from his goals, as he says that the Celtiberians can do as they wish. Now, by becoming Hannibal, Scipio has become quite terrifying. But thanks to Gaius, he still learns to inject a little bit of levity into his life. With Iberia all but gone, Hasdrubal will now make plans to cross the Alps so that he can meet up with Hannibal. It is now 209 BC in Canusium. Hannibal's elephants are running amok on the battlefield, as he tells Silenos to signal the retreat. Marcellus wants to pursue, but his men are battered to all hell. News then comes in that Scipio captured Carthago Nova, meaning that Rome now has 3 pillars to keep it strong, that being Fabius, Marcellus, and Scipio. Hasdrubal's army will now cross the Alps, which means that Hannibal will finally have the reinforcements that he's been waiting for. Isn't that kind of crazy though? Hannibal's waiting for reinforcements since like 215 BC, and it's already 6 years later and they still haven't sent him any. Hannibal now wants Magon to organize some Numidian cavalry so that they can take Marcellus for good. It is now 208 BC in Venusia, and this is serving as a camp for Marcellus's forces. Marcellus then goes out to survey an advantageous hill for the upcoming battle. From said hill, Marcellus and Bandius could see Hannibal's entire camp. It's an excellent location. Unfortunately, this placid scouting trip turned out to be something way worse, and that's because the Numidian cavalry started to pounce upon them. And within minutes, Marcellus's men were completely surrounded, as the cavalry started laying waste to them. He then meets Hannibal's gaze off in the distance, as he realizes he's been ensnared in a Carthaginian trap. Now Marcellus realizes that it's all over, but he'll put up one final fight before he's all done for. Marcellus wants to draw the enemies towards him so that the others can escape. Bandius can't bear this thought, but Marcellus wants him to help out Scipio and Gaius in Iberia. The Romans run away as Marcellus jumps off of the ledge to begin the onslaught. Despite killing many men, the javelins really take a toll on him, and it's not long before the proud soldier eventually loses too much blood, causing him to collapse to the ground. Hannibal acknowledges that Marcellus was a strong warrior, the strongest warrior in fact. But, that being said, he was not a strong general. With this, the one man who could stall Hannibal in battle was lost. The situation in Rome felt helpless once again. It is now 208 BC in southern Iberia. Hasdrubal avoided conflict with Scipio, making his way to the Alps so that he could meet up with his brother. Gaius is suspicious of Hasdrubal's plans, considering that he's heading southwest when the Alps are to the northeast. Scipio then entrusts Appius to attack Hasdrubal's detached force on the hill. Turns out that Appius was to lure out the Carthaginians, so Marcus's troops could flank the enemy. Hasdrubal sends out the Numidian cavalry as a reinforcement to turn the tide in his favor, but all of this is playing into Scipio's hands. It turns out that he intentionally lured out the enemy so that he and Gaius could capture the enemy's camp in one strike. The Eastern Numidian prince commands his men to head back to camp so that they could provide assistance. Unbeknownst to everyone except Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian had laid out his own bait for the Roman leader. Scipio realizes the man that killed his father is here, and is leading a formidable force of cavalry. Hasdrubal wants his troops to leave the camp so that they can completely surround the Romans. The Numidian cavalry make the Romans look like amateurs. Scipio admires their equestrian prowess, but he must concoct a plan to put a halt to their killing spree. The Romans then find themselves surrounded, but given their numerical advantage, they slowly whittle down the enemy. Massinissa, the Eastern Numidian prince, realizes how fearsome Scipio really is. Word then comes in that Hasdrubal left with a small band of cavalry, fleeing the battle completely. It turns out that he set up this entire situation so that he could cross the Alps unabated. Massinissa signals the retreat, as Scipio commands his men to chase them down. Now, just like a lizard that cuts off its own tail to flee the battle, Hasdrubal sacrificed his own troops for his own sake. Now, Scipio made a deal with Nero. If Nero recommended him, then Nero would get another chance at killing Hasdrubal to restore his honor. Now, allowing Hasdrubal to cross the Alps will cause Scipio some punishment, but he's hoping to avoid this since he achieved great success by capturing Carthago Nova. While Hasdrubal makes his way through the Alps, Nero impatiently waits for his hated foe to arrive. Now, Nero bribed some people to gain the seat of council for himself, and he did this so that he could lead an army against Hasdrubal himself. Now, as it turns out, the Roman Republic draws lots to decide where the councils will go, and Nero was to head south towards Hannibal. Now, it's been 10 years since Hannibal has seen his brother, and he's done well to defend Iberia. Silenos reports that Scipio's forces defeated Hasdrubal's in Iberia, and he subsequently had to run away. Now, Hasdrubal's army will arrive in 2 to 3 months, meaning that Hannibal will bide his time until that time arrives. Hasdrubal, however, crossed the Alps much faster than anticipated. Now, he sent out a messenger to contact Hannibal, but Nero's troops were able to intercept him, and with no knowledge of Hasdrubal being on the Italian peninsula, Hannibal never came to his aid. Nero then sent half of his army to Metaurus to join up with Livius to cut off Hasdrubal. Now, Livius is fearful that Hannibal will mop up Nero's army that he left behind, but Nero claims that Hannibal has no idea that Hasdrubal already crossed the Alps. Now, Nero will hand Livius all the credit for this result, but he wants full control over the army to take down Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal's army stands at 30,000, and the Romans at 37,000. Hasdrubal then makes the realization that his messenger didn't make it to Hannibal. The two armies then draw up their battle positions, as the Romans suspect that Hasdrubal will use the cavalry on the hill to his advantage. Now, Hasdrubal hid the bulk of his army on the right wing behind the elephants. This tactic was known as the oblique order, something that Alexander the Great used to great effectiveness during his conquest. The Romans charged forward, as the river was to their left with the hill toward their right. Hasdrubal then shifts his battle lines leftwards towards the hill. Nero ceases his progress, realizing that Hasdrubal's left flank is tightly formed in a defensive position. Meanwhile, Rome's left wing becomes disorganized due to the Carthaginians. When Nero realizes that the Carthaginians set up an oblique order, he quickly orders his men to reinforce the left before things get out of control. He then returns to Livius with a plan to change the tide. He wants to spook the Carthaginian elephants so that they run amok on the battlefield. They thusly begin by skewering the elephants, causing the large beasts to become increasingly chaotic, even charging their own men. Hasdrubal's men are close to routing the left, but unfortunately for him, Roman troops led by Nero have already taken his rear. Now, sometime later, a single Roman cavalry tosses a bag into Hannibal's camp. Upon opening up the bag, Hannibal finds something that is quite unexpected, and it's his brother's severed head. And with this, the Carthaginians' hope for turning this war around was dwindling. Nevertheless, Hannibal angrily vowed to show the Romans no mercy for what they'd done. Back in Iberia, Scipio seems to be suffering from an illness. And with this opportunity, Mandius, a man who's working for the Carthaginians, wants to raise the flags for rebellion. The two brothers will wait to see how things play out before making their decision, however. Scipio might have tuberculosis or food poisoning at this point, as he's coughing up a severe amount of blood. Marcus then says that Mago and Gisco have amassed a force of 74,000. A force that is double Scipio's army. Despite the odds, Scipio orders all his troops to march towards the Carthaginians. Mago wants to take advantage of Scipio's sickness to seize the advantage, but he wants to win a small victory at first. And for them to do this, they're going to rely on the two brothers inside the Roman camp to make the Romans turn against themselves. The raid begins as the Romans are caught completely off guard. Another raiding party is seen in the distance, making Scipio contemplate retreat. Fortunately for him, the raiding party is Bandius' men, an unexpected development that caught everyone off guard. Now, Mago came so close to routing them, but the Romans have successfully defended themselves. Now, with Bandius' men on his side, Scipio will overcome the odds, just like Hannibal has done so many times before. And he's going to do something that Hannibal has done numerous times, make the impossible possible. Gisco mocks Scipio for retreating multiple times, but Mago says that they must be cautious, because Scipio is a very dangerous man. Now, it turns out that Hasdrubal's war elephants ran amok, leading to his army's self-destruction. Massinissa worries about their own war elephants, but Gisco doesn't want to hear his cowardice talk. Now, it turns out that Scipio is waiting for the rain. He wants to mimic Hannibal's strategy at the Battle of Trebia. The next morning, Scipio sends out a raiding party to harass the enemy. The Carthaginians are lured out to an early morning battle, in which it's already raining. Scipio wants a long, drawn-out battle. The longer it goes, the more the scales tip in his favor. Scipio raises his sword, claiming that Neptune is still with them. The two armies race towards one another as Manga is worried about what Scipio has planned. The elephants pose a threat to Scipio's plan, but if he can deal with them quickly, then he'll hold a key advantage. Bandius vows to protect Scipio as he stabs one of the elephants with his javelin. The elephants then become irate. It stampedes towards Massinissa, kicking him into the air with devastating force. With the elephants running amok, the Romans go on the offensive. Libyan tribesmen dispatch the elephants so that they won't destroy the Carthaginians. The Libyans then enter the fray for real, giving the Romans everything they can handle. Now, once the two turncoats enter the battle, they plan on rebelling against the Roman army. With the battle becoming fiercer and fiercer, the rain comes down harder and harder. That being said, the Romans are pushing back the Carthaginian army, and Mago realizes that this reminds him of the Battle of Trebia. Scipio must have fed his men very well before the battle, just like Hannibal fed his men very well before the Battle of Trebia. And with the Carthaginians waking up very early and missing breakfast, their strength is waning and waning as the battle goes on. Scipio's army continues pressing forward as it's not long before they envelop the Carthaginians. Mago prepares to flee as he informs Gisco that Scipio is on the same level as Hannibal. Gisco vows to attain his revenge in the future, as he orders all his troops to retreat. The Romans then celebrate their victory, as Bandius brings Scipio the Eastern Numidian prince. "What do you say, Massinissa? How about fighting under my command?" queries Scipio. Massinissa decides to turn down the offer. If he were to flip sides at this moment, Gisco would give away Sofan Nispa to some other man, a thought that he cannot bear. And Sofan Nispa is the bride that he's supposed to marry one day. Scipio wants to trade Massinissa to King Syphax of Western Numidia, and in exchange, he wants to get some Numidian cavalry. Silenos tells Magon they are holding up in camp for now. And the reason that they're doing this is they really don't have better prospects. They're not getting any reinforcements from Carthage, and Hasdrubal's plan failed, so they're kind of stuck at the moment. Scipio heads to Western Numidia to meet with King Syphax. When he gets there, he's surprised to see that Gisco is enjoying a cup of wine. Now, King Syphax will hear both sides to see what their offers are before he makes his decision. The negotiation begins. Scipio reminds Syphax that Hannibal's advance has petered out, and Rome is making significant progress in Iberia. Scipio promises to provide security for Western Numidia, that is, if they help out with Carthage. King Syphax says that King Galla of Eastern Numidia has passed away, so now all of Eastern Numidia is under his control. Scipio then announces that he has Massinissa in his possession, and if Syphax doesn't cooperate with Rome, they'll establish Massinissa as the rightful successor to the Eastern Numidian Empire. To counter this, Gisco says that Hannibal offers up Gisco's daughter, Sophonisba, and she just so happens to be the most beautiful woman in all of Carthage. Now King Syphax can barely contain himself, so he accepts Gisco's offer in earnest. "Of course, my kingdom will ally with Carthage," announces King Syphax. Scipio tells Sophonisba about Massinissa, but she begrudgingly gives herself to King Syphax. Upon hearing this news, Massinissa agrees to fight with Scipio to take back his beloved. Scipio now wants to return to Rome so that he can become the next consul. And if he's successful, he'll sail to Africa. 205 BC in Rome. With his astounding success in Iberia, Scipio was voted in as the next consul. That being said, he was randomly chosen for Sicily for his next assignment. The other senators wanted Scipio somewhere else where he'd be more useful. Fabius says that if they continually break the proud traditions of the Republic, it will lead to an era of kings holding absolute power. Scipio says that Hannibal is a cornered rat, and if they allow him enough time, he'll build up his strength and attack Rome once more. If Scipio were to land in Africa, however, it would send shockwaves to the Carthaginian Senate. They cannot continue to live in fear of Hannibal anymore. A compromise is then reached. Scipio will spend 1 year in Sicily before he heads to Africa. Scipio shows Roman slaves how to use a gladius with great effectiveness. Now, the new Roman gladius is quite a bit shorter than the other swords, but given that the Romans were quite a bit shorter at the time compared to the Carthaginians, this actually worked out pretty well to their advantage. Now, Scipio got married to Aemilia prior to his campaign in Africa. Massinissa heads back, since King Syphax has ceded his uncle to the throne. The two bid each other farewell, as Scipio says that they'll meet again in Africa. King Syphax worries about Scipio coming next spring, but Sophonisba reassures him that the Numidian cavalry are unbeatable. Now, with springtime arriving, Scipio sailed to Africa with his fleet. As it just so happens, Fabius would pass away next year. And with that, Rome's sword and shield were gone. But as the old relics faded away into the past, they had a new sword to fight the Carthaginians with, that being Scipio. Scipio boldly steps onto the African soil, showing the Carthaginians the might of his army. It's 203 BC in Utica, and in order to lure out Hannibal, Scipio ransacked the coast of Carthage. But it wouldn't last for long. Scipio's army of 26,000 now faced a combined force of 93,000, and it was through the combination of Gisco and King Syphax's armies. Massinissa meets up with Scipio, but due to him fleeing for his life, he only brought over 60 horsemen. Scipio reminds him that Hannibal was never afraid to dirty his hands, and the Roman leader has learned well from his methods. Massinissa will do anything it takes for him to achieve his goals, anything to get his dear Sophonisba back to him. Gaius was then sent to Syphax to negotiate a truce. Upon returning later that night, he tells Scipio that they are to withdraw from Africa, and in return, Hannibal is to be recalled from Italy. Scipio tells Gaius to reject the offer, as he asks Marcus how the recon mission went. Now it turns out that the enemy is in thatched huts, so Scipio wants Massinissa to use flaming arrows to set them ablaze. Several days later, Massinissa's men send a barrage of flaming arrows into the camp. As the camp burns down to cinders, Roman troops block off all the exits, leaving the Carthaginians trapped inside. King Syphax goes into a panic, as Gisco says that they have a means for escape. Now when the walls collapse, everyone is going to scatter, and Gisco plans to escape with Syphax amongst the commotion. Now Scipio entrusted his emotions to Aemilia, and this is the only means for him to act like Hannibal. For him to become a demon, he's got to forget all his emotions. To protect my beloved Rome, I will become a monster, as hated as he is feared. A monster like Hannibal. 10,000 of the charred corpses laid amongst the remains. But unfortunately for Scipio, Syphax and Gisco escaped to the west. Syphax fled back to Cirta, the capital of the Eastern Numidian Empire. Now Syphax is besides himself for having nearly been burned by Scipio. Sophonisba reminds Syphax that if Scipio defeats Carthage, he'll lead his army to Numidia, and he'll most definitely put a sword to his throat. For the sake of Syphax's unborn child, he has to see this through to the very end. 203 BC, Bagrades River. Syphax's 30,000 troops will now face off against Scipio's force of 15,000. Now Gisco only brought 4,000 Iberians, as opposed to the 10,000 that he promised. The enemy is sporting a surprising number of cavalry, making the Romans slightly nervous about this situation. Scipio wants to combine the Roman manipular formation with Hannibal's envelopment tactics, and in this way, he hopes to surpass Hannibal. And with each side setting their formations, they start charging towards one another. In a flashback, Massinissa said that the key to defeating the Numidian cavalry was charging forward no matter what. With many of the soldiers consisting of inexperienced peasants, the mobility of the Numidian cavalry is severely limited. Marcus heeds Massinissa's advice, as they start chopping down the enemy. The Romans seize the advantage very early on, leaving the Carthaginian army in a complete disarray. Roman infantry are then forced to retreat due to the brutality of the Carthaginians. Though they are winning the center, Gisco says that the Romans use maniples to rotate the fresh troops to the front. With the Iberians attacking in a rudimentary fashion, i.e. always charging forward, it's not long before the Romans use their shields and gladiuses to take the advantage. Gisco wants to reinforce the center by using the troops on the wings. The Romans then signal the horns for a change in rotation. But as it just so happens, Scipio has something else planned for this battle, and that just happens to be a complete and utter envelopment. Instead of performing a normal rotation as expected, Scipio used his third and second lines to completely wrap around the enemy. Once the center figures out what's going on, their flanks were already being hemmed in. Syphax, Gisco, and Hannibal. Behold, a second Cannae will unfold here today. Numidian cavalry abandon the battlefields as Syphax escapes on his own horse. With the disastrous defeats at Utica and Bagrades, the Carthaginian Senate went into a panic. They thusly ordered Hannibal to return to Carthage at once. Now Massinissa will give chase to Syphax, but Scipio says that Rome is a republic, so he must be captured alive. Although disgruntled at first, Massinissa agrees that watching Syphax get humiliated would bring him great joy. Not too long after that, Massinissa captures Syphax. They return to Cirta, where Syphax is paraded through the streets completely naked. And this is all for the citizens' amusement. Massinissa then goes to claim his most treasured thing, that being his betrothed, Sophonisba. Sophonisba claims that it's already too late, as Syphax says that she's a demon that bewitches men with her beauty. "Behold! The new king is already falling for the demon's spells," says Syphax. Scipio regrettably informs Massinissa that Sophonisba will have to be returned to Rome with Syphax. Unfortunately, she's not completely innocent in this affair, and will probably receive some form of punishment for her part in this. If she can somehow prove her innocence, however, she might be able to claim that Gisco forced her hand into this marriage. Unfortunately, the only thing she had was proof that she was guilty, and that's because she was pregnant with Syphax's child. In a state of confusion and shock, Massinissa runs away from the three. Scipio says that if she becomes queen, her punishment will likely be less severe, especially considering Massinissa's contributions to the Romans. Later on that night, Massinissa hands Sophonisba a concoction that will abort the baby. If she doesn't follow through with this, she'll be humiliated as Syphax was today. Furthermore, if she doesn't kill the baby now, Rome will have it killed in the future. And Massinissa himself even admits that he'll kill the child himself if it comes down to that. Sophonisba agrees to drink the poison, but as Massinissa leaves the room, she decides to drink the entire bottle in an effort to kill herself. "You were too late. I wish you had come for me sooner," says Sophonisba. Massinissa is beside himself as he watches his lover fade away forever. Upon hearing the news, Scipio apologizes for how things turned out. Massinissa wants Scipio to leave Africa, but the Roman general can't do that until Carthage is thoroughly destroyed. Now for the time being, Massinissa left Scipio's army so that he could quash the remaining supporters of Syphax. Now in the southern part of Italy, Bruttium, Hannibal receives word to return back to Carthage. Although Hannibal's army has been pushed back, with Mago arriving from the north, it seems like a ripe time for their counteroffensive. But as it turns out, the Senate has also recalled Mago back to Carthage, meaning they're going to throw away all their progress they made in these 15 years. With Mago becoming more and more capable, Hannibal will return to Carthage with him doing battle with Scipio. Scipio has undoubtedly got stronger in these years, so Hannibal's weary army will need the assistance of Mago in Carthage. Despite Hannibal's vast wisdom and military expertise, the one thing you need to prevail in any war is a strong state. And he did not have a strong state. Now when the messenger arrives in Mago's camp, he sees that their soldiers are all battered up. And even Mago is suffering a grave wound, and it doesn't look like he has much longer to live. Being the youngest brother, Mago always had a chip on his shoulder. But now that this is the end, he has failed to live up to Hannibal's expectations. The envoy relays a message that Hannibal was always impressed with his brother. And hearing this validation puts a smile on Mago's face. It's what he's been waiting for all his life. And with this renewed confidence, Mago attempts to sail off to his brother. But as they sailed off, it was quite noticeable that his wounds were too grave. In his final thoughts, Mago was glad to be Hannibal's brother, as he wishes the blessings of Baal to be with Hannibal. 202 BC, port of Leptis. Hannibal then receives the somber news that Mago is dead. Despite the circumstances, Hannibal will push on, hoping that some opportunity will present itself. Hannibal then tasks Magon with persuading Massinissa to aid their side against Rome. But Massinissa blames Carthage for using Sophonisba as a political tool for attempting to persuade King Syphax. Now after hearing Massinissa's side of the story, Magon cannot in good principle ask him to join Carthage. He returns to relay the info to Hannibal. Now at this point, Hannibal is in desperate straits, so he considers contacting Numidian nobles who support Syphax so that they can help out. Meanwhile, the Romans found 3 Carthaginian spies in their camp, and instead of killing them, Scipio wants to give them a tour. He shows them his new swords, and even Massinissa, who is now formally joined up with Rome to fight Carthage. And even after showing them all of this information, he allows them to go back to Hannibal. Now, Hannibal is quite furious that Massinissa chose Scipio over him. With this development, Hannibal has no other choice but to hold negotiations for peace with Scipio. Now Hannibal waits for Scipio on top of a hill. Marcus and Gaius think that this is a trap, but Scipio does not want such a valuable opportunity to slip through his fingers. It is now 202 BC in Naragara. Scipio finally meets with Hannibal face to face, or shoulder to shoulder as it were. To save his motherland of Rome, Scipio has one opponent he must defeat, that being Hannibal. Hannibal asks Scipio how this war started, and Scipio says it began when he violated the treaty between them and invaded Saguntum. Hannibal counters this by saying that it started when Rome took Corsica and Sardinia. Even if he's right though, Scipio cannot allow him to plunder Rome any further. He's stolen too many riches and too many lives. Hannibal says that Scipio is like how he used to be. He feels like he can rise above the clouds. He feels like he's above it all. But he's failing to notice the enormous pit that's growing in front of him. Hannibal lays out his peace terms. Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily, and Iberia now belong to Rome, and Carthage will only reside in Africa from now on. That being said, Rome has control over all those territories at the moment, so this offer doesn't interest Scipio in the least. The two hit an impasse, which means that they'll have to meet on the battlefield tomorrow. Scipio acknowledges Hannibal as his teacher, since he's learned everything about battles from him. With Massinissa on his side now, Rome will destroy Hannibal, so Scipio wants Hannibal to give up now to spare his life. Hannibal declines this offer. After their meeting, Scipio finds out that Hannibal collected an incredible amount of elephants for tomorrow's battle. He then wants the infantry to assemble for an emergency training session. We then see that some of Hannibal's elephants are still children, as he has something very devious in mind for tomorrow. 202 BC, Zama, interior region of Carthage. Two geniuses born in the same era will now clash for their first and final time. Hannibal has 40,000 soldiers in his army, and he's going up against Scipio's 35,000. Scipio provides a rallying speech to all his soldiers, and it's all a means to increase their vigor for the upcoming battle. Though the Romans were bested numerous times in the past, they never gave up. And now they look to end this very war in Zama against the man who started it all. Though Hannibal's army is not as experienced as it once was, he reminds them that the Romans are cowards, and that their true colors will show up when they're enveloped once more. Magon will head up the cavalry, and he has a special plan that Hannibal instructed him to carry out. Silenos has severe concerns about this battle, but he notes that Hannibal looks calm and confident. Like he always does. Now, if Rome's power is left unchecked, they will slowly swallow up all of Africa. Now, as always, the Carthaginian army is made up of different mercenaries. They got the Iberians, the Gauls, the Numidians, and the Libyans. But if they fail to stop Rome here and now, they might not just take over Carthage. They'll most likely expand ever further and further, which means that all their lands are at risk at some point. So for the sake of protecting all their homelands, Hannibal urges them all to stop Rome's ceaseless rampage. The battle then commences, as Hannibal urges his men to let the war elephants wreak havoc on the battlefield. With the elephants charging chaotically, Scipio has his formation split in half. His men then hurl the javelins at the elephants' rear ends, causing them to run away. And with the elephants running through the clear, empty lanes, Hannibal's plan has been thoroughly refuted. If Hannibal plans to disturb our order, then we will overcome his plot through order itself, says Scipio. With his elephant gambit failing, Hannibal orders his first line to charge into the battle. Massinissa leads the right-wing cavalry, and he's currently chasing down Magon's unit. At a young age, Magon could never understand why people flocked over to Hannibal, but he's discovered that it's because he had Baal's blessing with him this entire time. No matter how small of a role he may have, Magon wants to be by Hannibal's side to the very end. Now Massinissa determines that Magon led him here to pull him away from the main battlefield. He turns back to return to the battlefield, as Magon must make haste to prevent this from happening. Scipio's men charge forward, as they begin skewering the Gauls with their gladiuses. Though the Romans are shorter than the Gauls, their short swords are quite advantageous in these close quarters, giving them a huge advantage. Massinissa sends 1,000 of his cavalry to help out Gaius on the left wing. He then wheels around to face Magon head-on. The two armies blitz into each other with javelins at the ready, and goddamn what an epic exchange this is. Now Magon believes that they hold an advantage in close quarters, as a javelin nearly hits him. The two leaders then stare each other down, as Magon states that he'll never lose hope in Hannibal. The two agree to fight each other one-on-one, as their horses charge in at full throttle. Hannibal calls back his first line to unleash the Libyans and the Carthaginians. Unfortunately, a dispute occurs, leading to infighting amongst allies. And this is the downfall of using an army of mercenaries. But given the fact that the Senate didn't give him more Carthaginian soldiers, he didn't really have a choice. Someone then informs Hannibal that Magon has fallen to Massinissa, leading Hannibal to employ his final tactic, an all-out concerted push. My veterans in the third line, charge! If the second line gets in the way, kill them as well. While Massinissa's men wipe the floor with Magon's troops, Magone says that he wishes that he could have seen the same sights as his hero Hannibal. And if not that, I wish I was a stepping stone for Hannibal to reach the stars. Massinissa wishes him goodbye, but says that Hannibal will not reach the stars. Instead, he shall lose his head upon this battlefield. The third line is comprised of Hannibal's most skilled men. Gaius takes care of things on his end of the battlefield, as he says that the center getting pushed back is all part of Scipio's plans. The day before the battle, Scipio said that the only way to stop Carthage was to swallow up their fire with an even greater fire. Tomorrow at the plains of Zama, let us bring this war to a close. With Rome's cavalry returning to the fray, an envelopment for total annihilation manifested itself on the battlefield. And as it turns out, the result for the battle was already decided when Scipio circumvented Hannibal's raging elephants. Desperate to change the momentum, Hannibal wants to ride inside and command the troops himself. But Sileno says that this does not sound wise. To seize victory from the jaws of defeat, there's only one last resort for the Carthaginians. And that is for Hannibal to surrender to Scipio and offer up his head. By offering up his head to Rome, it could be used to reinvigorate the Carthaginians, leading to a revitalization of their economy and the army. A Carthage that cannot overcome the death of a hero has no future. With the battle coming to a close, Hannibal's side lost 20,000 soldiers, with another 10,000 being taken in as prisoners. The Roman Numidian forces only lost 4,000, which means that the one and only battle between Scipio and Hannibal was a complete and utter lopsided affair. Massinissa informed Scipio that Hannibal fled the battlefield to escape to Carthage. Back at the Carthaginian Senate, Hannibal says that they must surrender, and it's precisely because the Senate failed to support him for all these years. Carthaginians, wake up to reality. Revitalize Carthage and destroy Rome. Hannibal and Scipio subsequently meet at Tunis to negotiate terms for peace. During the negotiations, Hannibal offers up his head to Scipio. Scipio then hands him a piece of parchment, and on it are very specific demands for the Carthaginians. Now, there are 3 major points on this parchment. 1, Carthage will pay Rome an indemnity. 2, Carthage will relinquish all its overseas possessions and recognize Massinissa as the ruler of Numidia. And 3, Carthage will be stripped of all its rights to wage war. Hannibal grudgingly accepts the terms and thusly offers up his head. Scipio, however, refuses this. He does not wish to take the head of the man whom he considers his teacher. Ironic as it is, Rome owes him for its growth. Rome has learned a great deal from these battles. They become stronger, wiser, and more clever. And Scipio claims that Hannibal is a very clever man, and a clever man would not attempt to attack Rome once again. I am a foolish man, and I may foolishly seek to bring down Rome once more and wage war, claims Hannibal. Until that day comes, the two then go their separate ways. Scipio was celebrated for his accomplishment over Hannibal, and was even awarded the agnomen of Africanus. The year is now 183 BC in Campania. Bandius, Appius, Gaius, and Marcellus all meet with Scipio, who is currently bedridden. And it turns out that he loathes Rome for what they did to him. Scipio abdicated for a pro-war stance against the Seleucid Empire. Now, when he accepted their indemnity payments, Rome saw this as accepting a bribe. Though this is troubling news, Gaius and the others still owe a great debt to Scipio. Now, Hannibal, as it turns out, was driven out of Carthage, and he eventually made his way to the kingdom of Bithynia. Now, the both have met their ends in a very pitiful fashion. Both were regarded as heroes at one point, and now they're being shunned by their own people. Scipio then looks forward to entering Valhalla, where he can fight Hannibal to his heart's content. And with this, Scipio Africanus would silently pass away, with this being the last thought in his mind. The Romans then search for Hannibal in Bithynia. They say that Hannibal stole power in the political realm in Carthage, and through his influence, Carthage paid off their debts to Rome in just 5 years. After finding out that Hannibal was working with the Seleucid Empire to take down Rome, he was kicked out of Carthage to drift as a political exile. Elsewhere, somewhere in the Bithynia Empire, Hannibal makes his escape as his horse falls off of a small cliff. With his leg broken, he does not wish to cause his accomplice any more trouble, as he urges him to run away. With his companions and his country gone, Hannibal was only left with his hatred. He used this hatred as a source of strength for so many years, but now he realizes how hollow it really was. He cries over the eventual downfall of his country, and how he should have fought for its sake instead of his hatred's sake. The Romans eventually surround him as he says, "I, Hannibal, will not die by the Roman blades." He then tosses back a bottle of poison as he dies immediately afterwards. 183 BC, two geniuses meet their end. Perhaps some higher power could not permit such blood-stained heroes from enjoying fortunate ends. And hence the two departed the world, shunned by their country and burdened with grief. May heroes reach the skies and become stars. And with that, guys, that concludes Ad Astra, Scipio to Hannibal. I'd imagine many of you are curious as to what became of Carthage in later years. Well, with Carthage unable to wage war because of Rome's conditions, King Massinissa happily raided and seized Carthaginian territory with impunity. And as you can imagine, Carthage got pretty fed up with this. So in 149 BC, they sent an army against Massinissa. That's right, he was still living at this point. I mean, he was probably pretty old, but he would die the next year. Now, Carthage subsequently lost that battle. Rome, not wanting this opportunity to go to waste, used this as a pretext to launch an invasion. Carthage would then surrender all their weapons to the Romans. But the Romans pressed on to take the city of Carthage. Surprisingly, though, Rome experienced many setbacks through 149 BC. This situation was remedied when Scipio Aemilianus, the adoptive grandson of Scipio Africanus, the guy that we were following in the manga, distinguished himself several times in battle. So yeah, Carthage gets destroyed by Scipio in the Second Punic War, and then they get destroyed by another Scipio in the Third Punic War. Yeah, it's just fantastic for them, right? Now, he eventually set up blockades to prevent supplies from reaching Carthage. The Romans then built a large brick structure in the harbor that utterly dominated the city wall, and this eventually led to the final assault in 146 BC, where the Romans systematically and completely destroyed the city and killed its inhabitants. After all the destruction and killing, only 50,000 people remained. And of these survivors, they were all sold into slavery. They literally were on a mission, guys. I mean, Rome was just fed up with the Carthaginians at this point. Now, this next part is highly disputed, but some people claim it is true. And when I say some people, I'm talking about respected historians. It is said that after the destruction of Carthage, Scipio Aemilianus wanted to ensure that no future generations could arise from this site. So the Romans salted the earth to prevent anything from growing there again. I mean, talk about rubbing salt in the wound. I mean, Jesus. Now, in a time period where killing and slavery was just as common as breathing air, I wouldn't be surprised if this happened. However, here's my doubts about it. Salt was a very expensive commodity in this time. It was actually referred to as white gold because of its importance in food preservation. So would the Romans really go to that extent? Like, you know what? It's already destroyed. We already killed everyone. Everyone's in slavery. There's no way that there's going to be a fourth Punic War. But you know what? Let's just spend a bunch of money and resources and just pour a bunch of salt all over their lands. I mean, if it is true, I mean, goddamn, talk about petty. Holy cow. And I gotta say, from a meta level, there's just a abundance of great memes out there. Like, I had a really good time looking that up, but that is just one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. Like, to go to that length. Like, we've heard of butchering and slavery before. The stuff that Genghis Khan did was just abhorrent. But, like, man, it's not even, like, brutal or sadistic. It's just, like, damn, man, like, you're just that petty, like, and you know what's funny about it, too, is that afterwards, the Romans are like, wow, this actually would have been a really good port city for us, for trade, and they just kind of ruined the land. So not only did they ruin it for the Carthaginians, they kind of ruined it for themselves. But with that, guys, that was the end of the Carthaginian Empire, never to rise again. Obviously, these two had a very storied history together. 3 wars, hundreds of thousands of troops dying, slavery, brutality, you name it. And, I guess at the end of the day, the Romans were just fed up with it. I mean, if you had a dispute with a country for decades, centuries, yeah, you're probably pretty fed up with their crap at a point, and I wouldn't be surprised if the shoe was on the other foot if the Carthaginians would have did the same thing. I mean, it's not too shocking when you think about it. I would imagine during this time period that everyone had a family member or a relative that was fighting in this war. So everyone had something at stake. Everyone probably lost someone that they knew. So yeah, there was a lot of bad blood. With that said, guys, this was a fantastic manga. Like I said, one of my top 3 manga of all time. And I'm just so glad I got to share this story with you. So thanks for listening all the way through, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.